I felt that, I was tired of having these experiences, and I can actually make my own experiences, not only for myself, but for other people that are interested in going into this space. So those were really the reasons that, it was all culminated into one. So you have that epiphany moment where you're just like, oh, I'm just tired of this, and I need to just go ahead and do it. And I had that moment about 5 years ago when I started Foodies LLC.
Welcome back to Leaving a Rich Legacy. I am your host, Jessica Rich, and this space is more than just a podcast. It's a love letter to my younger self and a brave space for the stories we don't always speak aloud in the Black and Brown communities. Here, we unpack the real, the layered, lived journeys of healing, legacy building, and choosing yourself in a world that often tells you not to. It's about the pivots, the pauses, the moments we give ourselves permission to rest, to evolve, and to walk away from what no longer serves us. In our I Choose Me series, we're highlighting powerful voices who've dared to prioritize their peace, purpose, and mental wellness unapologetically. And today's guest, he is the blueprint for what it means to pivot with intention. I'm honored to be joined by Neron Adams-Escalera, entrepreneur, professor, chef, and the author of The Art of Pivot. From the corporate grind to founding Foodies LLC, Nuran's journey is rooted in self trust, bold creativity, and the courage to redefine success on his own terms. This conversation is raw, inspiring, and a powerful reminder that you're allowed to shift, you're allowed to evolve, and yes, you can still build something beautiful. Nuran, thank you so much for joining me.
Hey, thanks for having me, Jessica.
Yes, I am super excited to share your story, your journey, and hopefully inspire my listeners. So let's dive right in. So for those who do not know who you are, just getting to know you, who is Naran?
Yeah, well, my name's Neron Adams-Escalera. I'm originally from Brooklyn, New York, so I'm actually living in Maryland and Prince George's County, Maryland now. But I'm the owner and the executive chef and owner of Foodies LLC, which is based here in Prince George's County, Maryland. I attended Temple University in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and I have my undergrad which was my bachelor's in legal and business management, and I also did my master's in New York at Baruch College, where I took courses related to policy analysis and evaluation. I also have my culinary degree from Prince George's Community College, where I also teach right now as an adjunct professor and just looking to continue my pivots, continue within my journey, and actually share my journey so people can actually see that blueprint.
Awesome. So you're doing a lot, right? You got a lot going on and you have multiple buckets. So excited just to share what you're doing and how you really made a decision to pivot. So in your book, you open up about life's turning points, right? What was that pivotal moment for you that made you say, like, I'm going to choose myself, I'm going to choose me and go all in on foodies?
Yeah, I think that the book definitely highlights my ability and decision to choose me. I talk about it in quite a few aspects. So within the career sense, education sense, even spirituality, it's something that is very important. Where choosing yourself has been more fulfilling to me. It's in terms of the career pivot, where there's a lot of things that I worked in a lot of different spaces. And I found myself not being fulfilled in those spaces. I found myself not really, being challenged. And culinary is something that has always spoke to my soul. And it's one of the things that I feel very happy doing. It doesn't feel like work when I am doing it. And I think that the experiences that I've had in some of the career spaces that, I've navigated, whether it was having, microaggressive bosses or passive aggressive bosses or dealing with situations that, I felt as though this is not something that I want to continue within. And I know that there's something bigger and better out there for me that I can use my talents to actually not only fulfill others, but fulfill myself. So I think that the main decision that I've had and the main reason why I decided to really move into that space was I know this is something that I can do. I put the business plan together. I put actually the work in, which was also, educating myself more within that space and going back to culinary school. So I actually did it the opposite way where, I went undergrad, grad, and I went back to undergrad for culinary. But it was something that I continued to invest in myself within that space. It just was necessary for me. And I felt that, I was tired of having these experiences and I can actually make my own experiences, not only for myself, but for other people that are interested in going into this space. So those were really the reasons that, it was all culminated into one. So you have that epiphany moment where you're just like, oh, I'm just tired of this and I need to just go ahead and do it. And I had that moment about 5 years ago when I started Foodies LLC.
I think, as entrepreneurs and starting a brand or a business, sometimes you can have a really supportive community. And then sometimes you have people who may project their fears or nervous for you or just have a lot of questions. So during that process, how was that for you? Like, did you find yourself having a lot of support, or were there people around you that, had a lot of questions or hesitation for you when you began that journey?
Yeah, I had a mixed bag. It was actually pretty interesting because, I at first, when I was doing my mom and my dad, they're like my biggest supporters, but they come from two different schools of thought. So my mom is always gonna, give me the negative side of things or, more so things to watch out for. My dad's more of like, just go ahead and do it, you'll learn on the fly. So I had that kind of mindset where I'm looking at it from both aspects where there are certain things that, I should be mindful of and I should be, a little wary of going into business for myself. And then there's things that I should be confident within to know my talents and know that I can continue educating myself and the things that I'm going to learn along the way. My friends very supportive. I always, try to speak to somebody when I'm going to make a major pivotal decision. So I have some really, really good support, people within my corner that I can actually go to let them know that my ideas and, they'll also give me some pointers on, what to look for, maybe, ways to go about trying to succeed. I think this was something that it not only was going to speak to what I am good at, but something that I can continue to grow within. So I've never been trained as a chef, early on in my childhood, but when I got to the point of feeling like I needed to actually go back to school, it was something that I knew I was either gonna love it or I was gonna hate it. So learning the science of it and actually having to go back to undergrad, it just seemed easy for me. It just seemed like a very easy fit. So I also built a lot of mentors within that space in my school. And, I let them know the things that I was working on and I want to own a restaurant and, food trucks and, I want to move into that space fully. And, they were nothing but supportive. They also gave me the other ends of it, things to watch out for. But, it's really a mixed bag. And I think it's necessary to have that mixed bag of, things to watch out for. Hopefully it's, constructive feedback, but also things that, you should feel confident in, things that you may want to, continue to invest in yourself. But, I think I like hearing it from both sides where it helps me to navigate both ends of it, where, I'm not thinking that it's just going to be all easy and it's going to be all, peaches and rainbows and all. It's going to be just, just fine. There's going to be things that you're going to have to pivot and, kind of make changes and adjust. So, it's just not one of those things that it's going to be very easy. But I was very thankful for the both, but both constructive feedback and the positive or, feedback to remain confident within that space.
So that's good that, you can acknowledge it was a mixed bag,
Mhm.
but it both contributed to the process. And so it wasn't negatively to the point where it like just kind of beat you down and you just gave up,
Yeah.
right? It really had an impact. And so thinking about that support, you mentioned mentors. My experience, and it may not be yours, but I felt like the journey to entrepreneurship was like isolating. And I
Mhm.
felt alone a lot because in my family, no one else really had the experience. And so the journey to like getting to that place can feel isolating at times. And so, how have you been intentional about building and maintaining a community around you while you're doing, your teaching and you're working and you have foodies? You have a lot going on. So, how are you maintaining and building a community?
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot to juggle, but balance is key. That's one thing that I have been learning more and more, that balance is key. And it's it's easier said than done, but you also have to manage a schedule. I think being organized is very important. Managing a schedule, finding time for the things that, are outside of those things that, it may just give you a mental break. It may give you a mental reprieve where you need those breaks. You don't want to burn yourself out. You don't want to, tire yourself out where you can't even get to the point of you, living in your fulfillment. So, I often try to use balance as something that, is very important to me. Where, yes, I'm gonna, have to navigate, full-time catering, full-time work, full-time, anything else that deals with my passions, but you also have to have time for yourself. You have to have time for your friends and family. You have to have time for the things that you also find important outside of that. So I think it's balance. It's one finding that balance, and then it's also trying to make sure that you're dedicating time to other people and things that are also just as important as business aspects.
So, with all the hats that you are wearing, it sounds like you pour a lot into a lot of different people in the things that you're doing. And I am a huge self care advocate, like self care, mental health advocate. Like, that is definitely something I promote. And so, for you, what are some of the self care habits or practices that you have to stay recharged, to make sure that you're pouring into yourself and, that you're showing up your best as your best self?
Yeah, I would say definitely picking up a hobby. So I play golf. So I love playing golf. That's one of the things that I can go out into nature. I can, think about some of the things that I want to do, but it also gives me a break from, my regular routine, or, even just, if there's a rough week that I've had, I go out and play golf. But there's other things too, like reading. I also like to catch up on shows. I'm big into like crime documentaries. So I know a lot of people watch, different documentaries. Also watching cooking shows. So it's like, I'm not having, I'm not cooking per se, but I'm watching other chefs in their element, and it gives me ideas of how to work within my element. So it's continuing to refine my skills when you're not even really thinking about it. But I would say picking up some hobbies, making sure that, one, continuing that balance. Everything can't be all work, but when you work hard, you can also play hard. So travel is important. Traveling to see other cultures, seeing other environments is very important to me. It's one of the things that we try to do every year. Me and my friends, we always try to take trips together. We were recently in Colombia, so I got to see the Afro-Latino culture, which is big in my community as well. So there's just places that I like to travel. I have some big trips coming up, which should be pretty fun. But it's all about that balance. You have to make sure that you have the right balance so you can stay mentally sound in the things that you have to do.
So I'm happy you mentioned traveling. The
Hmm.
reason why is because I love to travel, and I know from my experience in the Black and Brown community, I feel like we don't travel enough. Like we do not travel enough. And so for you, what does traveling mean to you? The ability to be able to travel. You talked about going to Colombia, so not just domestically, but internationally. What does that mean for you as a person? And as you're just going through this journey called life.
It's important. You get to see people in different, different environments, and the U United States is not the only, place on this earth. So, it's important for me because I get to experience different cultures, different foods, different languages. My family, we speak Spanish, and I'm working on my Spanish. I'm not fully fluent yet, but I'm working on it, and you get to see, different cultures, experience each other. So each culture has different things about them that they may have, that they may experience. I've been to Thailand, and they have like a big water festival where they celebrate their summer, and they just have water gun fights. So it's like things like that. Spain, they have bullfights, and they have people, running with the bulls. So you get to experience these different things, and you just get to see how others interact with each other, and you just know that things are a little bit different on maybe this side of the world, but the interaction is always the same. People love to eat, people love to have fun. And I think it's important. It's one of the things that, if you just kind of stay within your community, you're only seeing that one interaction when there's just a bigger world out there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well said. So thinking about, you're still working a 9 to 5, and I like to call it a 5 to 9, but you're both are full time, so you're pouring into both, but jumping into full-time entrepreneurship while still being in that corporate 9 to 5 space, that's huge. And that creates a lot of courage and time and effort. And so for you, what impact did that pivot have on you when it comes to your sense of identity and purpose?
Yeah, that's a very good question because one of the things that I continue to do within that aspect was to make sure that I'm going to continue investing in myself. So when I know it's time for me to leave that 9 to 5 or that 5 to 9, I'm gonna feel fully comfortable in that space. And that's the part of the journey now where I talk about this a lot within the book where I'm detailing the journey actually as it's happening. Yeah, I'm giving some pointers and things about my life that brought me to this space, but it's important for people to know that that pivot, that change is possible. If you're looking to make that, and that's a major change, going from full-time employment to fully being on your own, where I still have other things that I'm working on just to have a safe space that, if I need to just teach or if I need to, do something else, like I can. But I think it's important because, we have to make sure that we are making the right decisions at the end of the day. We have the right backing in place, and it's gonna happen, but I know it's gonna happen in the time frame that it feels right for it to happen. So right now I'm just putting all the pieces together and making sure that I have that backing, but it's something that I'm very adamant about. I know it's going to be something that is going to be a major change, but once it does happen, I know that I'll have all the pieces together that I need, and I'll continue to invest in myself where I won't feel as though a lot of times when people make that change, they feel as though they may have to go back. And I would just want to make sure that I continue going forward.
Okay. So thinking about, so you talk about the book it is capturing like you in the moment. So,
Mhm.
you're talking about as you're going through this process, your thoughts, thinking about the pivot. And so for you, when I think about entrepreneurship, it can be very rewarding, absolutely. But there comes a fear of uncertainty. And so although you're saying you want to make sure you have all the pieces together, how are you navigating those times where fear starts to creep up and you're like uncertain, and it kind of pulls you back to maybe it's not time or it's not the right decision? How are you navigating that?
Yeah, that's a tough thing to navigate at times where, you may think you're making the right decision, but I think that as long as you have that confidence within yourself to know that, this is something I'll just have to adjust from, you'll be okay. It's one of those things that I remember I had a catering event where it was about 150 people, and I had to hire some of my friends, and it was like, I don't know how we're gonna get this done, but we just made sure we got it done. So it was a challenging time, but we all had to try to figure it out together. Even though I'm really, the face of the business and I'm making sure I'm leading the effort, it's one of those things that you have to try to think about what you could have done better, what you could adjust within, and how you would do things differently. So I would just say just do it, just do it, get it done. And we'll always adjust. There's things that we're always going to find that we can do better. There's things that we are going to do well, but we want to make sure that we're providing the best service. That's at the end of the day, in my business, that's one of the things that is very important to me. And I also like to talk to clients or customers, whoever I'm going to be working with, to figure out their experience and how I could have done better. Which helps me to be better in the future.
So thinking, you're talking about this wedding that you had where you
Yeah.
had like 100 people you had to serve. I don't know if it's the same story that was mentioned in the book, but you being able to identify like when to seek help. I feel like at times, we want to do it all, right? We want to do it all, and sometimes we're we don't want to ask for help, or we wait till we get to a breaking point and then we ask for help. So are you a person who knows when to identify, like, I want help, or you welcome it, or are you at a place where you still try to wear all the hats until you absolutely have to bring people in? And that can be just not just with foodies, but just in life in general.
I'm slowly getting to the point where I'm asking for help. So, it's I think it's a trust thing. It's a trust thing where, I at least like to learn about everything that I'm doing before I ask for help. And I usually try to do it by myself, but I'm getting to the point now where I'm asking for more help, and I'm really tapping into those resources that you have. There's a lot of resources we have available that can help us out, whether it's financially, whether it's emotionally, whether it's however physically, where I'm carrying loads and loads of catering bags at times, and I'm like, I need some help. So I'm slowly getting to that point where I'm asking for help, and even to the point now where I'm looking for some catering space for hopefully by next year. And hopefully I can hire staff where they'll be able to help with a lot of these things that I've been doing on my own. And it's not for the weak. It's not, it's backbreaking work where you have to carry a lot of stuff, you have to set up, you have to clean up, and that requires some level of help. Even like I'm doing my own accounting and doing my own social media stuff, that requires some help. So I'm getting to the level now where I'm becoming a little bit more open and flexible to that. But in the past, I'd say a few years ago, I would just do it all by myself, and that's not always a good thing.
Okay. I was guilty of it at one point, so I definitely understand. And so as you talk about you wanting to open an event space, and you're running your social media, you said you're doing the accounting, and so you have a lot of things that you're doing for the business in itself. And you talked earlier about self-care and the things that you enjoy, but burnout is real. And burnout can creep up, very easily without you. You're thinking that you're doing all the things, and then you hit a wall. And so is there anything that you're intentionally doing to avoid burnout?
Yeah, I would say I'm actively trying to find that balance where, I would say to prevent burnout, that requires you sometimes to step away from things and to really find other activities that also give you fulfillment. But for me, that just looks like the things that I love to do, which is travel, play golf. I'll even pick up some writing, where I can just write in a journal and just really chronicle the things that I want to do, or maybe that, I'm looking to, improve my own self, and things that I just might be even thinking about. I think journaling is very important too, just because, and even within therapy, you're able to let someone know these things that you're thinking of. And it's something that I've actively done. Therapy is something that's very important to me. I also speak to my parents quite a lot. I speak to my brother a lot. These are things that help me to not only clear my mind, but to figure out the right guidance forward. And just speak to friends, speak to friends, speak to those that, have a positive mindset that are able to, help you navigate certain things that you may be unsure about. Because, once you're burnt out, stress is another thing that I think, we don't talk about enough, and it affects our bodies in ways that we don't even see. We might not even know. We may be going to the doctor, or we may be feeling some kind of pain, and it could really be related to stress. So, I would say definitely talk to people. Make sure you have an outlet. Seek guidance, but also make sure that you're stepping away and doing things that give you happiness. Things that make sure that you are still being fulfilled in other areas besides your main either 9 to 5 work or even your entrepreneurial stuff. So just make sure that you're still mentally able to do all the things that you want to do. It keeps that right balance.
So you mentioned therapy, which
Yeah.
I said earlier, I'm a huge mental health advocate. And so for you, especially specifically over the last 5 years, how has your relationship with mental health evolved as you've discovered this purpose? And you've always had a passion for cooking, right? And so now with foodies and really identifying that purpose, how has your relationship with mental health evolved?
Yeah, it's evolved immensely. I would say that, I think we don't talk about it enough, even on the mental health aspect. But I was in a place where I seek therapy because I was in a bad place in life. There was a relationship wasn't going well, and the job situation was even rougher, and it was just one of those things that I felt like I needed to talk to somebody who, objectively, where I could just share my experiences and wouldn't feel judged, or and I could be fully honest with. So it's evolved to the point where now I'm even, I do family therapy. We all just find a space where, me, my mom, my dad, my brother, we can all talk, and that helps us a lot because it's something that's open, it's an open forum, and we can talk to each other, in a very candid way where we can, not only try to find ways that we can help each other, or if there's issues that we may have, we can kind of, hash them out, but it also gives us a space to talk on a regular basis where, we may not have that. We all have busy lives, and, my parents are retired, but they're the busiest people that I know sometimes. They they find time to travel, and my dad and my mom, they always, going to dinner somewhere, or, making sure family is okay. And we also have to find time to speak to each other. So it's definitely evolved where I can appreciate it a lot more. I think it's helped me tremendously to the point where, I feel comfortable enough to tell them some of my, most personal, stories, or, even share this journey with them. It's something that before I really didn't know how to share with people, or how to tell people I may be struggling in a certain area. And it gives me the opportunity to be fully honest and open with someone that, is not going to judge me, or, maybe have preconceived notions of me. So, I think it's evolved, and it's going to continue to evolve because it's something that I do enjoy doing, and I find time, to set aside even around from everything else that I'm doing. I still try to find time to do that, not only for myself, but with my family as well. And I think that we all appreciate it more, when we can be a little bit more open and honest with other people, and it helps us to be more honest with ourselves.
My family therapy is a great idea. I absolutely love that. And when I think about legacy, it's more than leaving generational wealth, it's breaking or creating generational patterns. And so to be able to carry that forward to the next generation for your family is huge. And so I absolutely love that. I don't know if my mom can handle seven of us in that capacity, but I think that is just a great idea. So kudos to you and your family for doing the work together and having probably some difficult conversations, right? So that's awesome. Now, thinking about therapy, and you talked about your parents being open to the family therapy session with you and your brother, but you have gone to therapy yourself. And in the Black and brown community, it is so taboo. I hear a lot of people who will say, I don't want to tell them my business, they're going to tell the world my business, I don't feel safe. And so do you have any advice for that individual that may need support, or the advice, or the safe space by a therapist that just is hesitant? Any advice to help to encourage them to seek therapy?
Yeah, I would say just try it. Just try it, see what you think. But I would also say to find someone who's very, who's relatable to you, who can, actually, share dialogue about your experiences. And also just to, if you have insurance, check your insurance, because a lot of times insurance actually covers it. So, I think sometimes people like, oh, therapy is expensive, I don't want to pay for it. And most times you don't even know that your insurance company might cover it to a certain extent. So, that would be a good, my advice to people is just to try it. It's something that I didn't grow up, seeking any type of therapy, but when you sometimes we have certain catalysts to force us into certain things, and I felt that I needed it. It was something that I just tried, and I just actually liked it. So I continued it, and I continued it even on different levels where if there were other people experiencing issues, if that I may not have been able to speak to, I would recommend that to them as well. And you could just it could either work, or it can't work. What's the worst that can happen? But as long as you try it, and it may be something that you can actually unpack a lot, within that may be happening within your life. but you won't know until you actually try.
Yeah. And that's I think it's good. You won't know until you actually try it. And then also remember, I heard my very first therapist, she would say, a therapist is like trying on shoes. If you try on a size 9 and you're size 8, well, it's too big, right? And so you're gonna keep just going until you find the right fit. And so know that you may experience one or two therapists that's not a good fit, but you need to continue until you find someone that you really connect with. And you're absolutely right. Through EAP programs,
Right.
they usually offer like 6 to 12 sessions for free. And so take advantage of those benefits that you pay for anyway with companies. But that is great advice. So thank you for sharing that.
Mhm.
And, we were kind of just talking about legacy and, how, your family, what you're doing is a part of that with that family therapy and a lot of things that you're doing. And so when you think about building a legacy and specifically building it through foodies, how does your roots influence your mission and what you're doing within your business?
Yeah, I believe that, legacy is very important, and that's also one of the reasons why I wrote, The Art of the Pivot. And, it was important to me because, I'm not only showing my journey, but it also gives my family and generations to come, insight into the experiences that I had, as well as anybody who's able to relate to those experiences. Even if you just picked up the book and you just read it and you may not relate to it, but that these are some of the things that I experienced, and this is what made me, this was my mindset in moving into the space that I want to move in. So, building that legacy is important, and my family is very big on certain core values like resilience and being honest and trying to make sure that, it's not just about you, it's about other people that may be interested in doing the same things that you're doing, that may be either younger, older, different gender, whatever the case may be. But it's more impactful to actually show people why you're moving into a certain space, and then really show that it's one of the things that I like to see people happy. So that's one of the biggest things for me. But I also want people to understand why I do certain things. There's usually a rhyme or reason of why I'm doing something. But it's one of the also another thing what my parents instilled in me is that it's you gotta make sure that you're doing something for others as well. So when I look at the basis of my book and making pivots, making these types of changes, I've made these changes not only to fulfill myself but to fulfill others. It's also one of the reasons why I wanted to get into teaching, because teaching my craft to others and the way I do things, it can foster them to be able to want to figure out how they're going to do things. And I think I bring a lot of excitement and passion to it. I'm probably one of the younger professors in there, so a lot of my students, they're like, "Oh, like you're the professor here," and they're always a little shocked to see when I'm the one standing in front of the classroom. But I think it's important to build that legacy not only through myself but through others, my family and generations to come. And then also too, within my food, the premise of my business is Caribbean Latin fusion. So my family's from Puerto Rico and Santurce, Puerto Rico. And I've seen my grandmother, my abuela, she's cooked a lot for, the community. And a lot of her recipes, I try to fuse those into everything that I cook. So, I have certain recipes that, I'm making, different dishes from different cultures. And I put a few recipes in the book as well. I could put two recipes in there just so you can see, there's certain things that you probably have never heard of that, I use ingredients from different cultures, and it seems to be pretty good. It seems to be pretty flavorful. So I'm always big into flavors, but I incorporate a lot of these things into what I want to build for a legacy, which is very different from, just a standard definition. Like I know you touched on it briefly. It's not just generational wealth, but, it's also leaving certain characteristics behind, certain values behind that people could say, okay, this is either a part of my family or this is something that I'm interested in doing, and this person did it a certain way, and I want to make it my own.
Yeah. That's good. And especially you're saying like you want to make it your own. And with you being so intentional about pouring into foodies and pouring into uh everyone else, right? That's just like how you were raised. I have to think back to like this prioritizing yourself and making sure that you're good and you're whole. And so I know we talked about self-care, talked about burnout, but every day I'm intentional about choosing Jessica. Like, I'm gonna make sure I say yes to Jessica. And so for you, what does that look like in your everyday life? How do you make sure that you are still prioritizing yourself in your day-to-day life?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I've learned to do a little bit more now than ever. But it looks like me continuing to do things that make me happy. So I think happiness and peace is very key within our lives. So we need that as like a baseline. But we also need to make sure that we're doing conducting business. But it really looks like me balancing more of my time and those aspects that make me happy. We all have to deal with stress, but it's something that we can minimize or we can actually control certain things. Certain things we can't control, and we just have to take those things head on. But I also feel that when you are able to balance it in a way that you're organized and you know that you have to dedicate this amount of time to maybe your 9 to 5. And you have to dedicate this amount of time to your business, and then you're teaching on the weekend. So I've had to figure out ways to balance this in a manner that's gonna be beneficial to myself and continue to choose myself. But for me, it looks like continuing to reinvest in myself. So continuing to make sure that I know what's going on within the culinary world, how to continue to refine my craft, how to pass that along to students that are interested in that because that could be an experience where they say, I'm not interested in culinary anymore. So I'm that first line to say, I want to make sure that you at least, are excited about it and see, you can define your own passions, but, I want you to be at least excited about it. You're going to be here and this is what it's going to take to really continue on in this world. So, it's really balancing it out in a way that works for you. But for me, it looks like organizing these things and organizing my time a lot better to make sure that I'm not only choosing myself, but I'm also choosing people that are very much interested in the same thing that I'm interested in, how to help them positively move forward into those aspects.
One of the just through some research, I noticed that like one of your, I guess, favorite phrases or one of is when there's a will, there's a way. And so, what does that mean to you, especially in those moments when the path is very unclear,
Mhm.
right? And you're uncertain. And so, what does that really mean to you?
Yeah, when there's a will, there's a way, is you have to find that way. You have to make sure that, if you have an idea in mind, you have to think about what do I have to do to obtain that. So, for me, it looked like, okay, I wanna cook and I wanna, have events and I wanna basically, cater for these different events and how that's gonna look for me. So it looked like me having to go, well, I wanted to go back to school to make sure that this was something that I was going to be fully vested in, but also just really putting myself out there and saying, "Hey, I started a business. I want to, cater your event," and being able to take on large events, being able to take on weddings and large 150 to 200 person events that may be a little difficult, but you have to find out how to accomplish these things and be successful with it. So a lot of times it's really logistics and planning, but you have to dedicate that time, to these things and make sure that you are, putting your best foot forward, in order to make sure that you're fully successful.
With you taking the initiative, like you're like, I'm gonna step out and I'm gonna go for be open to the larger events where someone may be a little terrified to step out that way. So for anyone that's listening that is like at the edge, and so it may not be leaving their 9 to 5, but they're at the edge of starting a new chapter, what advice would you give them when it comes to identifying, their purpose and making that pivot to bet on themselves?
Yeah. Yeah, I can't stress this enough, but having a business plan first is very important. So, one thing that I did prior to me starting a business was to write out all my ideas within this business plan. some goals, set some goals for myself and when I wanted to accomplish those goals. And even if you don't accomplish them within that time frame, you figure out how to adjust, to make sure that you are at least working towards that. So I would say start off with a business plan. Make sure that you're fully vested, within, if you want to make that pivot to another industry or if you want to make that pivot to entrepreneurship, make sure that you are fully vested in doing that because I know oftentimes, people say, I want to do something, and then you get there and they're just like, oh, this is not for me. So, I didn't experience that with me moving from corporate to culinary. It's something that I just felt that needed to take a little bit more time, in order for me to do fully execute what I wanted to do. Restaurants cost a lot of money, food trucks cost a lot of money. What I'm doing now, is really the space that I need to build up to that level. And it's something that's going to happen. It's just that, I need to be a little bit more patient, and patience is very key as well. So I would say be patient with things, and invest in yourself the way the way you see fit. If it's something that, if you want to change your industry, try to figure out if there are other classes available that you can take that may help you with a certification, or it may give you more knowledge within that industry. I think those things are helpful because, it helps you to understand that, it may not just be what you see surface level. There's other things that may be involved with it, that you have to experience first. And, for me, it was actually, just diving right in and, starting the business after I started my business plan and, experiencing certain things that I had to make quite a few adjustments. And, these are things that I learned along the way. Thankfully, they weren't critical disasters. But, I think it was important for me to put myself out there and then talk to people as well. So I would say talk to others, make sure that, people that you confide in understand that where you're trying to go. People that actually, very supportive of you as well. And they have positive feedback, whether it's, criticism of things that may be, what you should be wary of, but, at least you can look at it from both sides and say, okay, this is something that I'm thinking about, I may be on the fence about, but I'm either going to move forward or I might find another direction and pivot to something that may be a little bit more my speed.
I think one thing that you said that I want to highlight is one, be patient with yourself, and then also, you know, surface level. And so, someone looking at you, especially like on social media or maybe at an event, you've been doing it for 5 years. And so you've gone through the hurdles of maybe the mistakes and lessons learned. And I think it's so important as entrepreneurs and business owners, you have to give yourself grace because you're not going to know everything. And although there are others who are willing to help and support so you don't make the same mistake, but it is not going to be all peaches and creams. It is not a straight road. All right, we're zigzagging and everything else, but it's okay. And so, giving yourself grace to make mistakes, especially if you're a person like myself. I'm used to being in a space where I was always successful, and then getting into a space where I'm not so much, or I'm learning. It can be difficult. So I definitely want to highlight that as you shared that. So thank you for that advice.
No problem.
So, Nuran, this is my favorite question of the podcast. This podcast is like a love letter to my younger self. And so, if you could have a conversation with your younger self, what would you say to him?
I would say do it anyway. That's one of the things that I feel that you know, coming from, I originally grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and I moved to New Jersey as a young kid. I thought I was going to play pro sports. I played soccer, I ran track, I got recruited to my high school pretty early on in middle school. So, I would just say that there are certain things that I never thought that I would cater or, I'd be a chef. I love to cook, but it's not something that I thought I would do. I thought I was going to be a pro soccer player, to be honest with you. But there were things that I was a little apprehensive about because, I felt as though, this is something I'm so good at, but I really don't love doing it. So, how am I going to navigate this? But, one thing that I met one of the great soccer players, his name was Pele, and he told me if you don't love it anymore, he's like, don't do it. So that's one of the advice. That's one of the biggest, things of advice that I've taken from, someone giving me some kind of guidance. And, it was something that, I felt as though maybe I need to do something else. So, What I did was, when I went to college, I just said I want to take up law, and I thought I wanted to be a lawyer, but I pivoted to something else, which was policy. And then after policy, I ended up, diving more in the government world, but I ended up here in culinary. So I would just say do it anyway because you're gonna find your journey, your calling. It's gonna actually speak to your soul. You'll know when it's gonna be time for you to move in certain directions that's more beneficial for you, more beneficial for your legacy as well.
Mm. That's good. And I like that you talked about the pivots even in school. I know on social media I've seen, a lot of people struggle with where they are in life in like their late 30s, going into 40, in their 40s, and I feel like it's never too late to pivot,
Mhm.
It's like be open to the fact that, it's a journey and there's no destination. Like you keep moving, you keep going. And so don't be afraid to pivot wherever you are in life. I love to hear the stories about individuals who go back to school in their 60s, 50s, becoming a nurse. And so don't be afraid to start something different, but then also don't be afraid to think that it's too late to start over because it's absolutely not.
Mhm.
So, Naran, you have shared a lot with us. I've asked you a lot of questions. I've enjoyed our conversation. I personally have been inspired just based on my own journey. And so, is there anything else that you would like to share with the listeners?
Yeah, I would say that I am a brand new author, so I did just drop The Art of the Pivot, and it really chronicles my life from a very early age, really up until now, and just I gave some tidbits about some experiences that I've had within education and how I pivoted there. Some experiences I had in career, which were, at times they were pretty frustrating, and it's times that I felt like I wanted to quit. There's things that, within spirituality that I've learned, just by writing this book, about my own family and, where, they were spiritually or, even mentally with certain things and then even relationships. So I shared some experiences that I've had in relationships that, made me want to pivot from things that I no longer wanted to experience. So, I would definitely say it's a good read. It's something that it was important to me in terms of building that legacy and people, not only for my family and generations to come, but also people that are, maybe on the fence about certain things or, experiencing, a career that they don't find fulfilling or they feel as though, their boss is always ragging on them, or there might be certain things that they just, don't want to experience anymore. So, I think that we are all, experiencing that at some point in our lives. And I think that the book was very important to highlight that, it's never too late to change, make changes in your life. We're all evolving, we're continuously evolving, and change is not really a straight line. Change is very, very much rapidly, evolving, if that's like, the term that I want to use for that. But, it's something that I think that, it's a good read. I would definitely say if, it's a quick read. And, it's important that people understand that there are other people, experiencing some similar, aspects of their life, whether, it's educationally, relationship wise, spiritually, that, if you want to make these types of pivots, you can. And hopefully, I shared probably a lot of my experiences, but, if you're able to share some of these experiences with me as well, because it helps me to understand what other people are going through, that's always helpful. And I always like to hear people's feedback about the book.
Yeah. And I'll say that I'm almost done with the book. Okay, it's called The Art of Pivot.
Nice.
And for someone who recently walked away an 18-year career, there was so many things that resonated with me. And I am not a person, I'm not good at reading at this age. I need an audible. And so I was like, all right. But you're right. It was an easy read. And there were some things that you touched on that I think so many people can relate to because you're talking about different aspects of your life that I think at some point we all can relate to. And so I would definitely share with the listeners. For me, who've already made the pivot, it still resonated a lot with me. And so I definitely think it is a book that I would encourage you to listen to, especially because I encourage my listeners to like find purpose. Your 9 to 5 can fund your purpose. But if you're in that stage where you're trying to figure out what purpose is like, and you want to make a pivot, I do think it's a good book and it's a very easy read. And so I will say that. So job well done. Because I was worried about not being on audiobook. But it was an easy read. And so Naran, the book is, I know I ordered on Amazon, so I would love for you to share with us how we can purchase the book, and then also where can people connect with you, and if you have anything that's coming up where people can be out on the lookout just to support you in any way.
Yeah, the Art of the Pivot, it's on Amazon. It's also on my website, freethefoodies.com. I'm on Instagram very heavily. So my handle is at the real Neron, and my business is foodies underscore DMV. I'm also on Threads at the real Neron. I actually have a book signing coming up in Houston on August 30th. It's at Drenny's Dream Wellness Spa. So it's actually going to be a pretty different kind of book signing where I'm offering limited for a limited time, so not everybody can come get a massage, but there'll be massages available, and esthetician will be on site. It's going to be a good vibe where it'll be like a day party type of vibe, but I'll be there signing books. It's in Houston, Texas, like I said, August 30th. And then I have one coming up in the DMV area, so DC, Maryland, Virginia. So it's going to be in DC. And that's likely going to be September 13th, but I'm working out the details for that as well. But I would love to see everybody there. If you can make it, I'm going to be on a whole East Coast tour. So Dallas coming up, hopefully, Philadelphia, New York, New Jersey. So I am looking to really push this book. I am working on the audiobook, so the audiobook is actually going to come out soon. So, I just had to make sure that, I'm working through a lot of these other logistics first. But, I think the audiobook is going to be pretty fun because I get to be myself. And, it's not just me reading the book, it's more so me getting to, like, explain some of the chapters and, have some fun stories even on the side of that. So, just working on a lot right now, but it's really hard when you still have that 9 to 5, but I'm working towards getting out of that too. So, but yeah, I'm hoping that everybody can actually come out, or if not, be able to grab the book and just let me know your thoughts.
Well, I will say I will also include your links with this podcast so people can connect with you and definitely purchase the book. But Naran, I just have to thank you for joining me today and sharing your journey.
Thank you.
This podcast really has been a reminder, that pivots aren't necessarily detours, and it's really a divine direction, especially if you're intentional, if you're pouring into yourself, and that you have the faith and confidence that you'll do well. So your story truly is proof that choosing yourself, even when it's uncomfortable or uncertain, can lead to something greater than we imagined. And from you working in the corporate space, culinary artistry, and from fear to purpose, you've shown us that sometimes legacy is built not by staying the course, but having the courage to change it. So, to everyone listening, if you've been feeling stuck, uninspired, or unsure of what's next, let this be your reminder that you can always pivot. Your passion still matters, your peace still matters, and your purpose still matters. The truth is, you don't have to have it all figured out, but you do have to choose you. So, if this conversation moved you, if it inspired you, please share it with someone who needs that push. Please be sure to get the book and get that motivation that you may need for your next step in your life, that next chapter or pivot. And also be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and connect with us online. And as always, keep showing up, keep pivoting, and keep choosing yourself. Until next time, have a good day.